Genevieve Zitricki was born on August 11, 1961, and was nicknamed Jeannie. In 1990, 28-year-old Jeannie was a systems programmer in the payroll department at Michelin North America headquarters. She was recently divorced and lived alone, but kept a very active lifestyle. She also taught at a local school. On April 6, 1990, when 28-year-old Jeannie failed to show up for work, a coworker, knowing this was extremely unusual for her, called the apartment complex and asked them to do a welfare check. So they sent a maintenance worker with a key to her apartment, and as soon as he entered, he knew something was wrong and called the police. When investigators arrived, they found Jeannie dead in her bathtub. The tub was full, and the water was still running and had flooded the bathroom. An autopsy determined that she had suffered blunt force trauma, was sexually assaulted, and then strangled to death. Based on the scene, they determined that her death was very violent. It also appeared that her killer had placed her in the bathtub after murdering her and then staged her body. The reason they believe he put her there was in order to get rid of biological DNA. Thankfully, it didn't work, and DNA was still recovered. She was estimated to have been murdered about 24 hours before she was found and was most likely ambushed as she slept. The killer had gained entry to her apartment through the back sliding glass door. Since the apartment was in such disarray, they weren't initially sure if this was a robbery gone wrong or if the killer had staged it to throw them off. They ultimately decided that it was staged. Another detail in the apartment was a message written on her bedroom mirror that said, "Don't F with my family." Once again, they believe the killer had written the message on purpose to throw off investigators. Since DNA was new at the time, and they had so little, they decided to hold off on having it tested. Her ex-husband was initially looked at, but he had a very solid alibi and was ruled out. Unfortunately, the case would remain unsolved for years. In 2006, the DNA was submitted to CODIS, and a match was found, but not to the killer, but instead to the double unsolved murder of Megan and Sherry Sherrere in Portageville, Missouri, that occurred on March 28, 1998. Unfortunately for investigators, the methods used in both crimes were completely different. Without the DNA, they might have never been linked. Both Megan and Sherry had been tied up and shot to death execution style. What really shocked investigators was that the murders were committed in less than 40 minutes, meaning that whoever killed them knew exactly what they were doing. After the killer ambushed them, he sexually assaulted Sherry, shot them to death, and then staged their bodies. That wasn't the only crime the man committed that day. 2 hours after the murders of Megan and Sherry, a young mother in Dyersburg, Tennessee, who had just arrived home, was approached by a man asking for directions. She said she didn't know where that address was, but he insisted on showing her a map. When he walked back to his vehicle to get it, she could sense something was off. When he walked back over to her, he said he couldn't find the map and pulled out a gun. She quickly grabbed the gun, and a struggle for life and death ensued. She managed to finally get inside, lock the door, and grab a rifle off the wall. At that point, the man fired through the door, striking her in the arm, and then fled the scene. Thankfully, the woman survived, and the bullet was recovered and sent off for forensic testing and matched the bullet used in the murders of Megan and Sherry. While the woman was able to provide a detailed description, it still didn't lead to a killer. In 2018, investigators partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, and a DNA profile was generated and sent off for forensic genetic genealogy. From there, a potential suspect by the name of Robert Eugene Brashers was identified. Brashers was a career criminal who had been convicted of numerous violent crimes, including attempted murder. 19 years later, on January 19, 1999, police came to his house to inquire about a stolen license plate they found on his vehicle. His wife answered the door, along with his twin daughters, and they asked if they could come in. Meanwhile, Brashers was hiding under the bed with a gun. Once they realized that, they spent the next 4 hours trying to coax him out. In the end, he took his own life. It's believed he resorted to that because he knew that being arrested would eventually lead law enforcement to his other crimes. The only thing left to do was to exhume his body in order to obtain DNA. The results showed that it was a match, officially solving all 3 murders. He was also linked to the sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl in Memphis, Tennessee that occurred on March 11, 1997. While justice was never served, at least he did the world a favor and could never hurt anyone ever again. Janet Gail March was born in Nashville, Tennessee on February 20th, 1963. After graduating from the University School of Nashville, which sounds like a college but is actually a K through 12th grade school, she enrolled in the art program at the University of Michigan. That's where she met and fell in love with her future husband, Perry March. The two eventually settled back in Nashville, where Perry was accepted into the Vanderbilt University School of Law. They would eventually marry and have 2 children together. In 1996, 33-year-old Janet was a children's book illustrator living in a suburb of Nashville known as Forest Hills. Her marriage to Perry had taken a turn for the worse due to his alleged affairs, and they ended up separated by August of 1996. At that point, Perry was living in a downtown apartment that he used as an office while Janet remained in the house. She then suddenly disappeared, and Perry reported her missing on August 26. Strangely, he said she had actually been missing since August 15th, making investigators wonder why he waited so long to report it. He explained that he waited because he came by the house to visit the kids on August 15th, and during that visit, she had shown him a to-do list detailing her plans for a 12-day vacation. He said that night she packed a suitcase, took $1,500 in cash, her passport, and a bag of marijuana and left around 8:30 p.m., never to be seen again. Almost 4 hours later, Perry called her parents to inform them of her sudden trip. 2 cabinet makers were in the house that evening doing warranty work on her new home and confirmed that Janet and Perry were both there with the kids. Strangely, when the housekeeper showed up the following day, on August 16th, Perry told her a different story and said that Janet had gone to California for a business trip and to visit her brother who lived in Los Angeles. That same morning, a friend of Janet's named Marissa Moody came by for a playdate. Seems Janet forgot to put that on her to-do list she showed Perry, or maybe he was just lying about the to-do list altogether. When she entered the home, she saw Janet and Perry's son jumping on a rolled-up oriental rug that she said seemed out of place. It turns out Janet had scheduled this playdate on August 14th, so why would she get up and leave the following day? If you are making a to-do list for a 12-day vacation, that is something you typically plan out well in advance. Janet's mother, Carolyn, wanted to report her missing on August 17th, but Perry talked her out of it, showing her the 12-day to-do list. She was finally reported missing on August 26, when Perry could no longer explain why she missed her son's birthday and his first day of school. A few days later, Perry fled with the kids to Chicago, and Janet's parents filed for visitation rights. As investigators were searching for Janet, they learned that a person doing work at the house had noticed a foul-smelling odor. So they obtained a search warrant and found some interesting things. First of all, the home computer's hard drive was missing, which they found strange. They then found a stained bath mat and took it for forensic testing. Perry was asked to take a polygraph exam but refused, saying the medication he was taking prevented him from doing so. He also refused to let investigators question his 6-year-old son. When he noticed they weren't buying his version of events, he lawyered up and refused to cooperate. The home was then searched again, and this time they found blood spatter that had been painted over. Almost 2 weeks after she was reported missing, on September 7, 1996, her 1996 gray Volvo was found about 5 miles from her home at an apartment complex on Harding Road. Inside were her purse with credit cards and a small suitcase with clothes and bathroom items in it. Investigators were clearly suspecting Perry had a hand in his wife's disappearance. Not only had he cleaned out his downtown office, fled Nashville, and stopped cooperating, but he also failed to attend his wife's memorial service in November 1996. As they dug more into Perry's past, they discovered that he had a bad temper and had gotten into multiple arguments with neighbors. He had also been fired from a law firm after sexually harassing a paralegal in 1991. In the meanwhile, the legal battles between Perry and the kids' grandparents continued. Eventually, the grandparents were awarded visitation rights, so Perry fled to Mexico in 1999, where his father lived. Janet's parents then had her declared legally dead so they could file a wrongful death suit against Perry. When he failed to show up to court, he was ordered to pay them $113.5 million. Her parents then traveled to Mexico and took the children from their school, which led to a chase by Perry's father, Arthur. They were able to outrun him to the airport. However, a judge in Nashville ordered the children to be returned to their father in Mexico. If that wasn't bad enough, a Tennessee Court of Appeals overturned the wrongful death judgment in 2003. All the while, Janet was still missing. In 2004, Perry was finally indicted for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. He was then arrested in Mexico and extradited back to the U.S. in August of 2005. After being booked into the Davidson County Jail in Nashville, he approached fellow inmate Russell Ferris about having Janet's parents murdered, even offering to pay his bond. Ferris then turned state witness against Perry and began recording their conversations. Perry had also put Ferris in touch with his father Arthur, and those calls were recorded as well. Arthur had instructed Ferris when to kill the Levines, where to get the gun, and how to flee to Mexico. Once investigators had enough evidence, Perry was charged with solicitation of first-degree murder on top of the other 3 charges. His father, Arthur, was also arrested and charged with the same crime. In the end, his own father would turn against him and confirm that Perry had murdered Janet on the night of August 15, 1996. He was then found guilty and sentenced to 56 years in prison. Arthur took a plea deal and received 5 years in federal prison and died on December 21, 2006. Investigators believe Perry made up the entire to-do list and was not aware of the play date she had scheduled. They also believe she was rolled up in the oriental rug that his son was jumping on. Apparently, Perry kept talking about the crimes to inmates and eventually told them what really happened that night. He said that she threatened divorce, which angered him, so he struck her with a wrench. He then burned her body and dumped the ashes in a lake. Arthur confirmed this and said that he and Perry drove to the secluded lot where the remainder of her remains were in a black plastic bag. He said they took the bag, drove to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and buried it. At this point, it had been over 10 years, and Arthur was unable to find the location. As of 2024, Janet's remains have never been located. Marvelin Isaac Bass III was born to Shelton and Marvelin Jr. on April 21, 1984 in Greenville, South Carolina, and went by Isaac. Isaac had graduated from Woodmont High School, loved music, especially rock and roll, and learned to play the guitar when he was younger. He also enjoyed camping in the Cherokee National Forest. Family described him as a kind person who loved his family. In 2007, 22-year-old Isaac was an employee at Wendy's restaurant in Greenville when tragedy struck. On January 27th, as he was leaving work, he was sadly gunned down in the parking lot in a robbery gone wrong. Unfortunately, the case would go unsolved for the next 3 years. In 2010, Crime Stoppers received a tip about a possible eyewitness. From there, investigators learned that the shooter was a 21-year-old man by the name of Corey Lamar Love, who was 17 at the time of the murder and had help from his stepbrother Eric Jared Ransom. In March of 2010, Corey was arrested and charged with attempted armed robbery, possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime, and possession of a pistol by a person under the age of 18. A few months later, in August 2010, Eric was also arrested and charged with the same crimes. Eric would have been 16 years old at the time of Isaac's murder. It's unfortunate that Eric threw his life away all those years ago because when he was arrested, he was currently serving in the U.S. Marine Corps in Okinawa, Japan. Eric pleaded guilty to armed robbery, but I was not able to find what his sentence was. However, he did testify in Corey's trial and said that Corey had been planning the robbery for weeks. In the end, Corey was found guilty and sentenced to 50 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Natalie Negray was born in Streator, Illinois on July 11, 1998, to parents Nicole and Shane, and went by the nickname Tay. She was said to enjoy art, makeup, modeling, and music. By 2023, 24-year-old Tay was living in Rockford, Illinois, and had already lost both her parents, her father Shane in 2016 and her mother Nicole in 2018. Sadly, on July 5th, Natalie was found dead in a hotel room at Mainstay Suites near the Woodfield Mall. 3 days later, on July 8th, at around 12:07 p.m., a man lured 10-year-old Destiny Huggins and her 6-year-old sister into the backyard of an abandoned home in their neighborhood by promising them money. Once there, he attacked the girls, but thankfully, the 6-year-old was able to get away and went and told her mother, who called 911. Sadly, Destiny did not survive and was found strangled to death. The man was later identified as 44-year-old Antonio Monroe and charged with Destiny's murder. Investigators soon learned that he was also seen with Natalie on the night of her death. He was then subsequently charged with her murder as well. Antonio had a history of criminal charges, including the sexual assault of a 19-year-old girl in 2010. For that crime, he was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in prison, but of course was released after only 3 years. While he initially pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder, attempted murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and strangulation, in the end, he admitted to the crimes and took a plea deal. He was ultimately sentenced to 60 years in prison for the murder and 30 years for the attempted murder. All other charges were dropped. On April 4, 1997, a brother and sister, ages 5 and 7, were playing outside their home with a couple of other children along West Newport Road near Scenic Road in Leacock Township, Pennsylvania. All of a sudden, a man in a blue work van with a ladder on the back pulled over to talk to them. He approached the 7-year-old girl and offered her $1 to touch his private part. He then sexually assaulted the little girl and her brother right on the side of the road. After this sicko was done, he fled the scene, and the girl ran home and told her parents. When the police arrived, they collected the clothes the little girl was wearing and found fluids that contained the man's DNA. A woman had also come forward and reported seeing the man on the side of the road talking with 3 or 4 children. She said he had dark brown hair and a mustache and was around 40 years old. She also described the van he was driving as light blue. Unfortunately, at the time, they were unable to locate him. In 2002, they were able to generate a DNA profile and upload it to CODIS, but no matches were found. However, they decided to go ahead and file charges as John Doe using the DNA genetic profile. The case would still go unsolved for another 20 years. In 2022, 25 years later, after the assault of the children, the DNA evidence was sent to Othram to generate a DNA profile. The profile and subsequent investigation led police to a 54-year-old man by the name of Eric Dorwart. Dorwart's driver's license picture from 1997 matched the description the woman gave the police of the man with the kids on the side of the road. However, they still needed his DNA to confirm the match. In May 2023, investigators waited for Dorwart to pull his trash to the end of the driveway. That's when they rushed over and grabbed a Rutter's cup purchased from a convenience store and other items from his home on Pleasure Road in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Using the lid on the Rutter's cup, they were able to generate a DNA profile, and it matched the profile from the sexual assault in 1997. In August of 2023, Dorwart was arrested and charged with the 1997 assaults. When they recovered 2 of his laptops and his iPhone, they found over 1,600 inappropriate images involving children as young as an infant. Dorwart was even present in 167 of the photos. Additional sex crime charges were then added on. Dorwart is currently awaiting trial while free on a $25,000 bail.